The rain had been a relentless, percussive drumming against the windshield for the last 100 miles, a monotonous beat that matched the thrumming anxiety in my chest. Each sweep of the wipers only revealed another stretch of slick, black asphalt disappearing into a void of darkness and mist. I was running, not from the law, not from any tangible threat, but from the deafening silence of an empty apartment and the ghost of a life that had crumbled into dust. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my eyes gritty with a fatigue that went bone deep. I'd been driving for 14 hours, fueled by stale gas station coffee and the desperate need to put miles between myself and the man who had hollowed me out. It was just after 2 in the morning when the glowing, sputtering sign appeared through the downpour like a fever dream. The Starlight Motel. It promised in flickering pink and blue neon, though half the letters were dead, leaving a cryptic message, PSRLIMOE below it. A smaller, hand-painted sign read vacancy, the word haloed in the lonely glow. It looked like the kind of place where hope went to die, which suited my mood perfectly. I didn't need charm or amenities. I just needed a horizontal surface and a few hours of oblivion. I pulled the car onto the cracked gravel lot, the tires crunching loudly in the sudden quiet after I killed the engine. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the air that seeped through the vents was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. The motel was a single-story, L-shaped building, its paint peeling in long, sad strips. Only one window glowed with a warm, yellow light, the one marked office. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the car door and made a run for it, the cold drizzle soaking through my thin jacket instantly. The office door chimed softly as I entered, a sound far too gentle for such a dilapidated place. The room was small and smelled of old wood, coffee, and something else, something clean and sharp, like sawdust. There was no one behind the counter, just a well-worn leather-bound guest book and a small, tarnished bell. A doorway behind the counter led into what looked like a private living space. I could hear the low murmur of a television. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the bell. I hated drawing attention to myself, hated being a bother. It was the middle of the night, but the thought of getting back in the car was unbearable. I tapped the bell. The sound was surprisingly loud in the small space. The television sound cut off abruptly. A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish rag. He was tall, broader than I'd expected, with shoulders that filled the frame. His hair was dark and cut short, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed a strong jaw. He wore a simple gray Henley that strained slightly across his chest and faded jeans. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were a deep, steady brown, and they assessed me with a quiet intensity that was neither friendly nor hostile. It was just watchful. He looked like a man who was used to being alone, and who didn't mind it. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to command attention. I need a room," I stammered, suddenly feeling foolish and small, dripping onto his clean linoleum floor. "Just for the night. Your sign says vacancy." He didn't look at the sign. He just kept his eyes on me. He took in my soaked jacket, my exhausted posture, the tremor in my hands that I couldn't seem to stop. His gaze lingered for a moment, and I had the unnerving feeling that he saw more than just a weary traveler. He saw the running. "Sign's busted," he said, his tone flat. "So's the key card machine. Everything's booked up. Big fishing tournament down at the lake." My heart sank. Of course, it was just my luck. I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. The thought of getting back into that car, of driving into that endless, rainy night again, was physically painful. I must have looked as wretched as I felt, because a flicker of something, pity, concern, crossed his face before it settled back into that unreadable stillness. "I see," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned to leave, the little bell on the door already seeming to mock my retreat. "Wait." The word stopped me, my hand on the doorknob. I turned back. He was leaning against the doorframe now, his arms crossed over his chest. The posture should have been intimidating, but somehow it wasn't. "The storm's getting worse," he said, nodding toward the window where the rain was indeed starting to lash against the glass again. "It's not safe to be on the road, especially Route 9. It floods easy." I just stared at him, unsure what he was getting at. He sighed, a soft exhalation of air, and uncrossed his arms. He seemed to be having an internal debate. Finally, he pushed himself off the doorframe and walked around the counter. He was even taller up close, and the scent of sawdust and fresh coffee was stronger. "I don't have a room to give you," he said, his voice softer now. "But I've got a spare bed in my place. It's just through here. It's not much, but it's dry and it's warm. You can stay the night. No charge." I was stunned into silence. My mind, conditioned by years of city living and a healthy dose of cynicism inherited from my father, immediately screamed a dozen warnings. Stranger, danger, axe murderer. But my body, my exhausted, aching body, just sagged with relief. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the faint lines around his steady eyes, at his hands, which were clean but calloused, the hands of a man who worked. There was a quiet solidity to him, a stillness that felt less like a threat and more like an anchor. "You don't have to do that," I said, the words automatic. "I know," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Offer stands. Your call." He wasn't pressuring me. He was just stating a fact. And in that moment, the exhaustion won. The thought of a warm bed, even a stranger's bed, was an irresistible siren song. The alternative was the cold, cramped car and the howling storm. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word a small puff of surrender. "Thank you." A barely perceptible nod was his only response. "I'm Cole, by the way, Leo," I said. He gestured for me to follow him around the counter and through the doorway into his home. As I stepped over the threshold, leaving the sterile, transient space of the office behind, I felt a strange shift in the air. It was like stepping from one world into another. The little bell on the office door was silent. He hadn't given me a key. He had brought me into his room. And the night, I sensed, was about to become very, very long. Cole's living space was one large, open room, tidy and masculine in a way that felt lived in, not staged. It was the complete opposite of the apartment I had just abandoned, which had been all sharp angles, cold glass, and minimalist furniture chosen by my ex to impress people we didn't even like. This place was warm. The walls were wood-paneled, the floor covered by a large, faded Persian rug. A worn leather armchair sat near a cast-iron stove in the corner, a stack of books on the floor beside it. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and brewing coffee, felt like a blanket. He gestured toward a simple bed tucked into an alcove on the far side of the room, separated from the main living area by a heavy curtain that was currently pulled back. It was neatly made with a dark blue quilt. "That's yours if you want it," he said. "Bathroom's through that door. There are clean towels on the rack." I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, my soaked jacket dripping a puddle onto his rug. I felt like an intruder, a stray brought in from the storm. My entire body was humming with a strange mixture of profound relief and acute anxiety. I was safe, I was dry, but I was also in the private space of a complete stranger. A very large, very quiet stranger. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Cole said, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He was already moving toward a small kitchenette area, his back to me. His movements were economical and purposeful. He opened a cupboard, took out 2 heavy ceramic mugs. "I've got some coffee on. Or tea, if you prefer." Coffee is great. "Thank you." My own voice sounded thin and reedy in the warm, quiet room. He just nodded, not turning around, giving me the privacy to deal with my soaked clothes. I quickly shrugged off my jacket and draped it over the back of a wooden dining chair, hoping it wouldn't ruin the finish. I toed off my wet sneakers and peeled off my socks, my feet cold against the floorboards. The sense of being watched was immense, even though his back was turned. It wasn't a creepy feeling. It was just a presence, an awareness that I was no longer alone. After 14 hours sealed in the solitary confinement of my car, the feeling was both jarring and strangely comforting. I went into the bathroom. It was small and immaculately clean, smelling of pine-scented soap. The towels were thick and white and felt like a luxury. I splashed warm water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles underneath. I looked haunted. I looked like what I was, a man in retreat. When I came back out, a steaming mug was sitting on a small table next to the bed he'd indicated was mine. Cole was now sitting in the leather armchair, his own mug cradled in his hands. He was looking into the dark maw of the cold wood stove, his expression thoughtful. The room was filled with a comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of the rain still tapping against the window panes. I picked up the mug. It was warm, the heat seeping into my cold fingers. The coffee was black and strong, and it tasted like salvation. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress firm beneath me, and took a sip. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I watched him. I couldn't help it. My mind, usually a chaotic whirlwind of self-criticism and worry, had narrowed its focus entirely onto him. I observed the way the soft light from the single lamp carved shadows along his jawline. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. He seemed utterly at ease in the silence, while I felt the compulsive need to fill it. "You live here?" I asked, the question sounding stupid as soon as it left my mouth. Obviously, he lived here. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. There was no judgment in his gaze, no mockery of my dumb question. "For now," he said. "Grew up in this place. My folks ran it. I came back a few years ago when my dad got sick." "I'm sorry," I said. He gave a small shrug, a gesture that dismissed pity. "It was a long time ago. I just stayed." He looked around the room, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "It's quiet." Quiet. That was the word. The whole place, the man himself, radiated a deep, profound quiet. It was the kind of quiet I had been craving, a stark contrast to the noisy, performative life I had been living. My ex, Mark, had thrived on noise, on parties, on the constant validation of others. Silence had made him nervous. It had made him cruel. I realized I was staring, lost in thought. I quickly looked down into my coffee cup. My hands were still trembling slightly. "You're shaking," Cole observed, his voice calm, matter of fact. "I am. My body is a live wire of adrenaline and exhaustion. I can't get it to stop. Long drive." I mumbled, a pathetic half-truth. He didn't press. He just watched me for another moment, his gaze so direct it felt like a physical touch. Then he stood up, his movements fluid and silent for such a big man. He went to a wooden chest in the corner of the room and lifted the lid. He pulled out a thick, heavy wool blanket, the color of charcoal. He walked over and held it out to me. "Here," he said. "You're probably in shock." I reached for it, and as I took the blanket from him, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But a jolt went through me, sharp and electric. His skin was warm and slightly rough. It was the first time someone had touched me with simple, uncomplicated kindness in I couldn't remember how long. My breath hitched in my throat. "I am falling apart. Right here, in this stranger's room." I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, the wool coarse and smelling faintly of cedar. The weight of it was grounding, a solid pressure that seemed to calm the frantic hummingbird pulse in my veins. "Thank you," I said again, the words feeling inadequate. Cole just gave that same small nod and returned to his chair. He picked up a book from the stack beside him. The cover was worn, the title faded beyond recognition. He opened it, but I didn't think he was reading. I felt his attention, his awareness, still settled on me, a warm, steady weight in the room. And so we sat, separated by 10 feet of quiet air. The man in the chair, pretending to read. The man on the bed, pretending not to be shattering into a million pieces. The only sounds were the rain and the soft rustle of a page turning, a sound that held no meaning. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, the scent of cedar and wood smoke filling my senses, and I watched him, my thoughts a slow, swirling eddy of fear and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of hope. I was a ship lost in a storm, and this quiet, steady man felt, inexplicably, like a lighthouse. The minutes stretched into an hour. The coffee in my mug grew cold. Cole never turned a page in his book. I stayed huddled on the edge of the bed, wrapped in his blanket, my earlier exhaustion replaced by a hyper-aware lucidity. My mind was a relentless narrator, analyzing every detail of the room, every subtle shift in the man across from me. I cataloged the books on his shelves, worn paperbacks of Steinbeck and Hemingway, a thick volume on botany, another on woodworking. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, save for a single, smooth river stone sitting on the windowsill. The place was a testament to a solitary existence, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt self-contained, complete. Cole finally closed his book with a soft sigh and placed it back on the stack. He stood and stretched, his back arching, the gray Henley pulling taut across his torso. It was an unself-conscious movement, the natural gesture of a man comfortable in his own skin. My eyes tracked the line of his shoulders, the solid column of his neck. I felt a flush of heat rise in my cheeks and quickly looked away, focusing on a crack in the ceiling plaster. "More coffee?" he asked. "No, thank you. I should probably try to get some sleep." The words felt like a lie. Sleep felt a million miles away. "Right," he said. He moved into the kitchenette and rinsed his mug in the sink, the sound of the running water loud in the stillness. He dried his hands and then walked over to the alcove where my bed was. He reached up and pulled the heavy curtain along its track, the metal rings scraping softly. The curtain didn't close all the way, leaving a gap of about a foot. It was a gesture of privacy, a clear delineation of space, and yet it felt more intimate than if he'd left it wide open. It was a conscious acknowledgement of my presence. "The light switch is on the wall by your head if you need it," he said from the other side of the curtain. "Let me know if you need anything else." "I will. Thank you, Cole, for everything. Get some rest, Leo." His voice was a low murmur through the fabric. I heard his footsteps move away, the soft creak of his own bed, which I realized must be on the other side of the room. A lamp clicked off, plunging the main room into darkness. The only light now was the dim glow from the bathroom, which I'd left on, and the faint, flickering neon from the motel sign filtering through the window. I lay down, still fully dressed in my damp jeans and t-shirt, and pulled the wool blanket over me. The bed was comfortable, the pillow soft. It was everything my body had been screaming for, but my mind wouldn't shut down. Through the gap in the curtain, I could just make out the silhouette of Cole's armchair, the dark shapes of his furniture. I was intensely aware of him, just a few yards away, breathing in the same quiet air. I could hear him breathing, a slow, deep, rhythmic sound. In, out. It was the most calming sound I had heard in months. Mark had been a restless sleeper, all twitching limbs and sharp, erratic breaths. Lying next to him had felt like trying to sleep next to a storm. This was different. This was the slow, steady rhythm of a calm sea. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to relax. But images from the last few weeks flashed behind my eyelids. Mark's face, twisted with anger. The sound of a plate shattering against the wall. His final words, spat at me as I packed my bag. "You're empty, Leo. There's nothing inside you." A tremor ran through me, a violent, full-body shiver. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the wave of shame and grief that threatened to overwhelm me. I would not cry. Not here. Not in this stranger's house. I must have made a sound, a small, choked gasp, because the steady rhythm of breathing from the other side of the room stopped. Silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. He heard me. He knows I'm awake. He knows I'm falling apart. I held my breath, listening. "You okay over there?" Cole's voice was soft, barely disturbing the darkness. I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. A floorboard creaked. I saw his shadow move in the darkness, a large shape blotting out the faint light from the window. He was standing just on the other side of the curtain. He didn't speak again, didn't push. He just stood there, waiting. His silent presence was a question. Slowly, I pushed myself up into a sitting position. My hands were shaking again, so I wrapped them in the blanket. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice thick. I heard the soft scrape of the curtain rings as he pushed the fabric aside just a little wider. His silhouette filled the opening. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of his broad shoulders against the gloom. "You don't sound fine," he stated. Not an accusation, just an observation. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sharp. I hated this. I hated being so transparent, so weak. I had spent years building walls, perfecting a mask of calm indifference, and this quiet, perceptive man had seen through it in a matter of hours. He took a step into the alcove. He didn't turn on the light. He just moved to the foot of my bed and stood there, a silent sentinel in the dark. He wasn't crowding me, but his proximity was immense. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Sometimes," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the quiet is the loudest thing there is." And with those words, something inside me broke. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. He was right. I had been running toward the quiet, thinking it would be a balm, but it had only amplified the screaming in my own head. He must have seen the glint of the tear in the dim light. He reached out, not to touch me, but to the bed. His hand rested on the quilt near my feet. A large, steady hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was an anchor. A point of contact in the swirling chaos of my mind. The touch was not on my skin, but I felt it all the same. It was a gesture that said, "I am here. You are not alone." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, clutching his blanket, and let the tears fall silently. He didn't try to comfort me with empty platitudes. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just stood there, his hand resting on the bed, his presence a solid, unwavering thing in the dark until, eventually, the storm inside me began to quiet, leaving behind an exhausted, fragile calm. He stayed until my shuddering breaths evened out, until the silence in the room was no longer heavy with my pain, but filled with a new, shared stillness. Then, without a word, his hand retreated from the bed. His shadow moved back, and I heard him return to his own side of the room. The curtain remained partially open. He didn't close me off again. I lay back down, my body feeling heavy and limp, my mind strangely clear. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long had receded, replaced by a profound sense of safety. It was a feeling so foreign I could barely identify it. I was in a strange motel, in the room of a man I had met only hours before, and yet I felt safer than I had in my own home for the past year. I listened to the sound of his breathing, the slow, steady rhythm that was now a comfort. I fell asleep not to the sound of the rain, but to the quiet presence of the man in the dark, the stoic protector who had offered a stranger not just a bed, but a harbor. I woke to the smell of bacon and the soft clinking of cutlery. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to place the scent, the sounds, the unfamiliar weight of the wool blanket. Then it all came flooding back. The rain, the flickering sign, the quiet man with the steady eyes. Cole. I sat up, my heart giving a nervous flutter. The curtain to my alcove was still partially open. Peeking through the gap, I saw him standing at the stove, his back to me. He was wearing the same jeans, but had swapped the Henley for a dark green t-shirt that stretched across his broad back. Sunlight, pale and watery, streamed through the window over the sink, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The rain had stopped. A wave of morning-after awkwardness washed over me. What was the protocol here? I had broken down in front of a complete stranger. He had witnessed a vulnerability I rarely showed, even to those closest to me. The shame was a hot flush on my cheeks. My first instinct, the one honed by years of self-preservation, was to flee. I could grab my things, slip out the door, and be back on the road before he even turned around. He'd probably be relieved. I swung my legs off the bed, my movements cautious and quiet. My damp jeans felt cold and stiff. My sneakers were still by the chair where I'd left them. I could do it. Just a few steps, and I'd be gone. Back to the anonymity of the highway, back to running. Morning. Cole's voice, calm and low, cut through my frantic planning. He hadn't turned around, but he'd known I was awake. Of course he had. He seemed to be aware of everything in this small space. "There's coffee," he added, gesturing with his head toward the pot on the counter. "Help yourself. Eggs will be ready in a minute." He was acting as if nothing had happened. As if it were perfectly normal for a stranger to show up in the middle of the night, have a quiet breakdown, and then be served breakfast in the morning. His casual acceptance was more disarming than any question he could have asked. It made it impossible to run. Running would be an insult to his simple, profound decency. "You don't have to do that," I said, my voice raspy with sleep. I stood and walked tentatively into the main room, feeling exposed and rumpled. "I was making some for myself anyway," he said, finally turning. He held a spatula in one hand. His eyes met mine, and his expression was as unreadable as it had been the night before. There was no pity, no judgment, just that same steady, quiet regard. "You should eat something before you hit the road." Before you hit the road. The words were a subtle acknowledgement that my stay was temporary, an easy out if I wanted it. He wasn't trying to keep me here. The choice was still mine. And that, more than anything, made me want to stay. I nodded and poured myself a mug of coffee. It was even stronger than last night's, and the bitter heat was a welcome shock to my system. I leaned against the counter, watching him expertly flip eggs in a cast-iron skillet. His hands were capable, sure. I remembered the feeling of his fingers brushing mine, the warmth of his hand resting on the quilt. "How did you sleep?" he asked, his attention on the stove. Better than I have in a long time, I admitted, the truth surprising me as I said it. It was true. Despite the emotional turmoil, my sleep had been deep and dreamless, a true oblivion. He grunted in response, a sound of acknowledgement. He slid the eggs onto 2 plates, alongside several strips of perfectly crisp bacon and a piece of toast. He carried the plates to the small wooden table that sat in the middle of the room. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a command, just a simple invitation. We ate in a comfortable silence. The food was simple, but it tasted incredible. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. I had been subsisting on coffee and anxiety for days. As I ate, I continued my study of him. I noticed the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way he held his fork with a quiet deliberation. Every detail seemed significant, a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. "So what's in Flagstaff?" he asked, breaking the silence. I looked up, startled. "What?" "You've got an Arizona plate," he said, nodding toward the window that looked out onto the parking lot. "And you were driving like you had a destination. Most people on this road are just passing through, going nowhere fast. You're going somewhere." His perception was unnerving. He was right. I was heading to my sister's place in Flagstaff, my designated port in the storm. I hadn't told anyone that, had barely admitted it to myself. It had just been a direction. West. "My sister lives there," I said, pushing a piece of egg around my plate. "It's the place to land for a bit." He nodded, accepting the vague explanation. "Sisters are good for that. Do you have any?" "No. Just me." He said it without a trace of self-pity. It was just another fact, like his name or the color of his eyes. After we finished, I insisted on helping with the dishes. He protested, but I was firm. It felt important to contribute something, to not just be a passive recipient of his kindness. We stood side by side at the sink, me washing, him drying. Our shoulders brushed occasionally, and each time, that same jolt went through me. The space between us was charged, filled with unspoken things. The air was thick with the clean scent of dish soap, the lingering smell of bacon, and his own unique scent of cedar and something musky and male. I am acutely aware of his body next to mine. The heat of him, the solidness. My own body feels like it's leaning toward him, drawn by an invisible gravity. This is dangerous. "So what's the story with this place?" I asked, needing to fill the silence, to distract myself from the proximity. "You said your family ran it." "My dad built it," he said, his voice taking on a softer tone as he carefully dried a plate. "Back in the 60s. This was the main highway back then, before the interstate went in. This place was always full. He loved it. Loved meeting the people, hearing their stories." "And you?" I asked, handing him a wet fork. "Do you love it?" He paused, considering the question. "It's different now. The interstate killed business. Most nights, I'm lucky if I get 2, 3 cars. It's mostly just maintenance." Keeping the past from falling apart, he looked around the room, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of weariness in his eyes. "But it's home. It's the only one I've ever really had." His vulnerability was a small, precious gift. He was sharing a piece of himself, a piece of his story. After he had held space for my brokenness last night, it felt like a profound act of reciprocity. When the dishes were done and put away, a sense of finality settled over the room. My time here was up. I had a destination, and he had a motel to run, however empty it might be. The thought of leaving filled me with a surprising, sharp pang of regret. "Well," I said, drying my hands on a towel, "I should get going. I can't thank you enough, Cole. For the bed, the breakfast, for everything." "It was nothing," he said, his standard dismissal. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. I went to grab my jacket. It was mostly dry now. I pulled out my wallet. "Please, let me pay you for the room. And for the food." He held up a hand, his expression firming. "No. But I told you last night, no charge," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just drive safe." I put my wallet away, feeling defeated. I pulled on my sneakers and my jacket. The moment had come. I walked to the door of the office, turning back to face him. He was standing in the middle of the room, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "Okay," I said, my voice small. "Well, goodbye, Cole." "Goodbye, Leo." I turned and walked through the office, the little bell chiming my departure. I pushed open the outer door and stepped into the bright, clean morning air. The world felt scrubbed new after the rain. I took a deep breath and walked toward my car, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. With every step, I felt a growing sense of dread. I was doing it again. Running. I was walking away from the first moment of genuine human connection I had felt in years. I was choosing the lonely road because it was familiar. My hand was on the car door handle when I stopped. I looked back at the motel office. I could just see his silhouette through the window, still standing in the same spot, watching me. What am I doing? The question screamed in my head. My entire life has been a series of careful, safe decisions that have led me to this exact point of misery and loneliness. And here, in this forgotten place, I had found a moment of something real, something quiet and steady and true, and I was just going to drive away from it. My heart was pounding, a frantic, wild drum against my ribs. Fear warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This was insane. I didn't know this man. He was a stranger. But he didn't feel like a stranger. Before I could overthink it, before I could talk myself out of it, I turned around and walked back to the office. My legs felt both heavy and light. I pushed the door open, the bell chiming again, a sound of return. Cole was still standing there. He hadn't moved. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as I walked back in. He looked surprised, but also not, as if some part of him had been waiting. I stopped in front of the counter, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to say. I had no plan. I had only the raw, undeniable feeling that leaving was the wrong choice. I forgot something. I stammered, the lie clumsy and obvious. Cole's gaze was intense. He didn't ask what I'd forgotten. He just waited, letting the silence stretch, giving me the space to find the real words. That's a lie, I admitted, my voice shaking. I didn't forget anything. I don't want to go. The confession hung in the air between us, terrifying and liberating. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. I felt stripped bare, my desperation and my yearning laid out for his inspection. I braced myself for rejection, for a kind but firm dismissal. Then, he gave the smallest, faintest ghost of a smile. It was the first time I'd seen him smile, and it transformed his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. Okay, he said, his voice a low, soft rumble. Then don't. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath until it came rushing out of me in a ragged sigh. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those two simple words. He walked around the counter until he was standing in front of me. The space between us was electric. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the coffee on his breath. He was so close. He lifted a hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, he gently took the car keys from my trembling fingers. The fishing tournament clears out tomorrow, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Room 4 will be free. You can stay there, as long as you need. He was offering me a room. A real room, with a key and everything. But it felt like he was offering me so much more. A respite. A chance. A place to stop running. Okay. I whispered back, my eyes locked on his. He held my gaze for a moment longer, a silent conversation passing between us. Then he stepped back, putting a little space between us again, as if he knew I needed the room to breathe. He placed my keys on the counter. Why don't you go get your bags, he said, his voice back to its normal, steady tone. I'll go get the room ready. I just nodded, unable to speak. I turned and walked out of the office for the second time, but this time, the chime of the bell sounded like a welcome. I walked to my car, my mind reeling, my heart a chaotic symphony of terror and joy. I had made a choice. I wasn't running anymore. I was staying. And as I opened the trunk to get my suitcase, I had the dizzying, terrifying, wonderful feeling that my life was about to change forever, right here at the Starlight Motel, a place where nothing ever happened. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, dreamlike state. Cole set me up in room 4, a space that was a mirror image of his own apartment, only furnished for a traveler. It was sparse but spotlessly clean, with the same scent of pine soap and old wood. He gave me a real, old-fashioned metal key, its weight solid and reassuring in my palm. After the intense intimacy of sharing his personal space, the privacy of my own room felt vast and a little lonely. He left me to settle in, saying he had some work to do. I watched from my window as he replaced a rotten board on the small porch in front of room 7. I watched the efficient, powerful movements of his body as he worked. The sun was out now, and it glinted in his dark hair. He had taken his shirt off, and his back was a landscape of taut muscle, glistening with a light sheen of sweat. I watched for far longer than was appropriate, my coffee growing cold in my hands, a slow, unfamiliar heat building in my stomach. I tried to make myself useful. I unpacked my single suitcase, the meager collection of belongings I had deemed worthy of saving from my old life. I arranged my toiletries on the bathroom counter, hung a few shirts in the small closet. The actions felt strangely domestic, as if I were truly moving in, not just passing through. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Later in the afternoon, I saw him hauling bags of mulch from the back of an old pickup truck. I went outside, the sun warm on my face. "Need a hand?" I asked, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. He paused, wiping a forearm across his brow, leaving a streak of dirt. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then he nodded. "Sure, if you're not busy." I was the furthest thing from busy. I was adrift. The thought of having a simple, physical task to perform was a lifeline. For the next 2 hours, we worked together in a comfortable, mostly silent rhythm. I would carry the heavy bags from the truck, and he would spread the dark, rich mulch around the sad-looking rose bushes that lined the walkway. The work was hard, my muscles, long dormant from a desk job, protesting with every lift. But it felt good. It felt real. The earthy smell of the mulch, the feeling of the rough plastic bags in my hands, the shared goal, it was grounding. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There was a communication in our shared movements, in the way he would glance over to see if I needed a break, in the way I would place the next bag exactly where he needed it. We were a team. When we were finished, we stood back to admire our work. The dark mulch made the whole place look a little less neglected, a little more cared for. "Looks good," I said, breathing heavily. "Yeah," he said, looking not at the mulch, but at me. "Thanks for the help." His gaze lingered on my face, and I felt suddenly self-conscious of the sweat dripping down my temples, the dirt smudged on my cheek. "It was nothing," I said, echoing his own words from that morning. A small smile touched his lips again. "Come on," he said. "I've got a couple of cold beers in the fridge. You've earned 1 inch." We sat on the small porch outside his office, in 2 old Adirondack chairs that had been painted a cheerful, if peeling, blue. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and pink. Cole handed me an ice-cold bottle of beer, and the condensation felt wonderful against my grimy hand. The beer was crisp and bitter, and it cut through the dust in my throat. We sat in silence for a while, watching the colors of the sky deepen. The quiet between us was different now. It wasn't the tense, uncertain silence of the night before, or the working silence of the afternoon. This was a shared, peaceful silence. A silence of contentment. "So what do you do, Leo?" he asked, his voice casual. "When you're not running away from your life and doing manual labor at rundown motels?" The question was direct, but his tone was gentle, with a hint of teasing. I felt a smile tug at my own lips. "I was a graphic designer," I said. "For a marketing firm." It was soul-crushing. "I can imagine," he said, taking a long drink of his beer. "Staring at a screen all day, making things look pretty for people who don't care." "That's it exactly," I said, surprised by his accurate summary. "You spend your life trying to convince people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have. After a while, you start to feel empty." I used the word without thinking, the same word Mark had thrown at me like a weapon. But saying it now, to Cole, it didn't feel like an insult. It just felt like the truth. "I get that," he said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "There's not much empty out here. The sky's full. The woods are full. It's just full of different things." He turned his gaze to me. "Maybe you just needed a change of scenery. Maybe I did. Or maybe I needed to meet someone who understood the difference between a full life and a busy one." As dusk settled, the neon sign flickered to life, bathing the porch in its soft pink and blue glow. The air grew cooler, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. We finished our beers and just sat, the silence stretching comfortably between us. I should go back to my room. I should take a shower, be alone, process the day. But I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't want this moment to end. I felt more at peace sitting here with this quiet man than I had in years. Are you hungry? Cole asked, his voice a low rumble in the twilight. I was just going to throw some burgers on the grill. My stomach answered for me with a loud grumble. I laughed, a real, unforced laugh. It felt strange in my own ears. I could eat, I said. He grilled the burgers on a small, battered Weber grill behind the office. The smell of the cooking meat was intoxicating. We ate them sitting on the steps of the porch, the plates balanced on our knees. They were the best burgers I had ever tasted. The night deepened around us. The trickle of traffic on the distant highway faded to nothing. It was just us, the crickets chirping in the tall grass, and the vast, star-dusted sky above. I haven't seen stars like this since I was a kid, I said, my head tilted back, mesmerized. In the city, the ambient light washed everything out. You were lucky if you could see a dozen. Here, there were millions, a thick, glittering river of them. This is nothing, Cole said. You should see it in the winter. The air is so clear it feels like you could just reach out and touch them. He was looking up too, his profile etched against the faint glow of the neon sign. There was a look of reverence on his face, a deep, abiding love for this place. I turned my head to look at him, really look at him. In the strange, colored light of the sign, his face was a mixture of shadow and color. His eyes, fixed on the sky, seemed to hold the reflection of all those stars. And in that moment, a feeling bloomed in my chest, a feeling so potent and terrifying it stole my breath. It was a feeling of profound, undeniable attraction. It was more than just physical. It was a pull toward his stillness, his quiet strength, his hidden depths. He must have felt my eyes on him, because he lowered his head and turned to look at me. Our faces were only a couple of feet apart. The playful, easy camaraderie of the evening evaporated, replaced by the same charged intensity that had filled his kitchen that morning. His eyes dropped to my mouth, then flickered back up to meet mine. It was a look that left no room for misinterpretation. It was a look of pure, unadorned desire. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that my own expression mirrored his. The air crackled. The sound of the crickets faded away. All I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. This is it. This is the moment where everything changes. He started to lean in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the tractor beam of his gaze. My own body leaned forward to meet him, a willing surrender. Our lips were inches apart when the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the moment. A pair of bright headlights swept across the parking lot, illuminating us in their harsh, white glare. We both flinched back as if electrocuted. A large, loud pickup truck, the kind with oversized tires and a roaring engine, pulled into the spot in front of room 2. The music blaring from its speakers was loud enough to shake the windows. Cole was on his feet in an instant, his easy posture gone, replaced by a rigid stillness. His face was a thunderous mask. A man and a woman, both loud and drunk, stumbled out of the truck, arguing. "Can I help you?" Cole's voice was dangerously low, all the warmth gone, replaced by steel. The man, beefy and red-faced, squinted at him. "Yeah, we need a room." The spell was broken. The delicate, shimmering bubble of intimacy we had built around ourselves had been violently popped. Cole went into business mode, his voice clipped and professional. He checked them in, his movements stiff. The couple continued to argue as he gave them their key, their loud, angry voices an ugly stain on the peaceful night. I stayed on the porch steps, my heart still hammering, my body thrumming with the ghost of our near kiss. I felt a surge of irrational anger at the intruders. They had stolen something from us. After they had slammed the door to their room, leaving a sudden, ringing silence in their wake, Cole came back to the porch. But the mood was gone. He stood with his arms crossed, staring at their truck, his jaw tight. "Sorry about that," he said, not looking at me. "It's okay," I said, but it wasn't. He finally turned to me, and the look in his eyes was shuttered, closed off. The vulnerability, the desire, it was all gone, hidden away behind his stoic mask. "It's getting late," he said. "I should probably turn in." It was a clear dismissal. The night was over. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat with disappointment. "Me too." I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Thanks for the burger." Anytime, he said, his voice distant. I walked the few yards to my room, the metal key feeling cold in my hand. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire way. I didn't look back. I went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, my eyes squeezed shut. We had been so close. So close. And now, the distance between my room and his felt like 1,000 miles. I had no idea how to cross it again. I could only lie awake in the dark, replaying that moment on the porch over and over, my lips tingling with the memory of a kiss that never happened.